Good evening, everyone. My name is Victoria Carpenter, and I'm the president of the King's Political Science Student Association. Welcome to the 2021 federal election debate here at King's. Before we begin, I want to take a moment to thank those who has helped us organize this event. Thank you to Dr. Hannah for helping us. Thank you to Ellie Kozak for helping us with the structure and planning, Amanda, Michelle, Sandy, Alexis, and Chantel for communications and catering, Joe and Jenny for all your support, Corey for helping us with our IT needs, John for moderating, and all of our lovely volunteers tonight. I would also like to give a quick shout out to my KPSSA team, Clara, Molly, Victoria, Ava, and Will, for helping this come together as well. Before we begin, I cannot stress enough the importance of voting. Voting is a privilege and right that we are all so lucky to have. Exercising your right to vote means using your voice to help decide who will run our country for the next 4 years. Each vote counts, and you all coming to this event is the first step in educating yourself on the parties, and I hope this event encourages you to hit the polls on September 20th if you haven't already. Now for a bit about our candidates. Peter Fragiskados, our Liberal MP, was elected as the Member of Parliament for London North Centre in 2015 and re-elected in 2019. Peter earned a political science degree from Western University, a master's degree in international relations from Queen's University, and a PhD in international relations from Cambridge University. He was born in London and is proud to reside in the riding of London North Centre with his wife, Katie. They are currently expecting their first child. Peter has served in several key parliamentary committee roles, which include Finance, Canada-China Relations, Foreign Affairs and International Development, Public Safety and National Security, and the Subcommittee on International Human Rights. He's an active volunteer who ran a youth mentorship program and has worked with many local not-for-profit groups. Durga Prout, our NDP candidate, was born in Vancouver but was raised by her maternal grandparents in Trinidad and Tobago. As an engineer, Durga knows how to solve problems. Durga is determined to end the squeeze of housing crisis in London and knows it's time for the government to get back into building affordable housing. Through her infrastructure work and involvement with the Unity Project, Durga has seen the people of her community get left behind while the government puts the rich and big corporations first. That's why she's fighting for the solutions people in London need, like universal pharmacare and housing they can afford. Marianne Hodge, our Green MP, is an engaged member of the London community as an environmentalist, community organizer, foster parent, and occasional teacher with the Thames Valley District School Board. A graduate of Western University, Marianne spent 17 years working as a corporate facilities manager in Toronto, understanding budget restraints and developing project management skills. After the loss of her husband, she returned to her hometown where she earned her teaching certificate. She teaches frequently in the French immersion schools in London. We invited the Conservative Party tonight, but unfortunately they were not able to make it. To give a land acknowledgement, here is Dr. Carolina Werner, political science professor at King's.
Hi, thank you so much for having me here. I'm very happy to be here and to give the land acknowledgement today. I would like to acknowledge that the King's University College campus is on the traditional territories of the Anishinaabeg, Haudenosaunee, Lenapehoik, and Attawandaron peoples, and that there are 3 First Nations communities locally in our area, the Chippewas of the Thames First Nation, the Oneida Nation of the Thames, and the Munsee Delaware Nation. Regionally, there are 11 First Nation communities and a growing Indigenous urban population. As a white settler scholar, land acknowledgements are important to me as a way to reflect on the spaces and places that we occupy as settlers and how those spaces have erased and minimized Indigenous spaces. It is about acknowledging both history and the present, and it is a way to disrupt the colonial present, but it is only the first step. The second step is about commitment to change and action. Appropriately, we are here today to see a debate between political leaders who, if elected, will have the power and opportunity to enact that change through policy. Thank you.
Well, good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us here. First of all, I'd like to thank the organizers, the students in political science are absolutely top tier students. We are so proud of them. The first debate that I attended 2 years ago was an outstanding event, and it's just an indication of how committed these students are to the political process, their knowledge, and their just awareness of community service, I think. Students are wonderful, but they're certainly wonderful as a function of their professors in political science. Colleagues, I'm so glad you've joined us here tonight. Thank you so much for your mentorship for these fantastic students. You do Kings proud. Aristotle said that every art and every inquiry aims at the good. He argued that the highest good is that of politics. And the reason why he said that was politics is the community. So here in North London, we have a very good community. We do. But it's not perfect. We do have flaws in our community, and the events that have taken place these past few days and the past few weeks are indications of some of those flaws and the work that we need to do. If Aristotle was here, he would also, I think, indicate that it's up to leaders, particularly moral leaders, to take these incidents, to learn from them, and to make positive action so that our community becomes better. It would also be Aristotle's belief that every individual that is in the community is responsible to make that community better. So tonight, with these potential leaders in our federal government, they are here to make our community better in our sense, in an Aristotelian sense. We have to do things better. We have to do things differently, though. I think the change that we require is a different kind of change. And I think we're all working very hard to find out what that is, to understand what that is, and then to take action. Words and platitudes are certainly not enough. We need to take action, but we have to do it in a different way than I think we have in the past. So I think the candidates tonight, Durka, Marianne, and Peter, are ripe to hear your questions and to offer their suggestions on how they would lead us in the next federal election. So with that, thank you so much. Thank you, candidates. I really look forward to your conversations tonight. And everyone, don't forget to vote. So very important. And best of luck tonight. I really look forward to your questions of the candidates. Thank you.
Thank you all for coming. My name is John Knight, and I'll be your moderator today. Tonight, we'll begin with opening remarks from each candidate, lasting for 1 minute and 30 seconds each. We will begin with Durka Prout, followed by Marianne Hodge, and then Peter Fragiskados. Following these introductions, there will be a 1.5 hour period of pre-prepared student questions. These come from students, faculty, and alumni, and I will be reading all of these. Each question will begin with who the question is addressing and which candidate will have a rebuttal. Candidate 1 will have 45 seconds to answer. Candidate 2 will have 30 seconds to rebut, and candidate 1 will have 30 seconds to rebut that rebuttal. In section 2, candidates will ask each other questions. I will begin by stating which candidate is asking which question and to whom. Candidate 1 will have 15 seconds to ask the question. Candidate 2 will have 45 seconds to respond. Candidate 1 will then have a 30-second rebuttal, followed by yet another 30-second rebuttal by candidate 2. In section 3, the live audience will ask questions. The audience members will have 20 seconds to ask the questions, and each candidate will have 40 seconds to respond. There will be no rebuttals for audience questions. A reminder of the rules for the candidates: there will be no speaking out of turn. You cannot go over your allotted time, and if you do, your microphone will be cut off. For timekeeping purposes, there will be 1 knock. when you have exceeded half of your speaking time, another knock when you have 5 seconds remaining, and there will be 2 knocks when your time is finished. We'll now begin with the introductions. Durka?
Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us tonight. My name is Durka Prout, and I'm running to be your NDP Member of Parliament. New Democrats know who we work for. While the other parties are busy working to protect big polluters, big corporations, and the richest few, New Democrats are out there every day working for you. Every day, I actually hear from people who are struggling to keep up. They see our economy as doing well, but only for the rich. Decades of liberal and conservative cuts have stripped away the possibility to have a good life. It's harder to afford a good place to live, to pay for an education, to cover the cost of bills, student debt, prescription medications, and essential services like internet and cell phone bills. Indigenous and racialized Canadians are facing this even more starkly, and people are still discriminated against for their physical and mental abilities, religious persuasion, sexual orientation, and gender expression. But we can make different choices. We can invest in things and make sure everyone can afford a good life, like healthcare, affordable housing, and climate action. Because if we want different results, we need to make different choices. If you're ready for better, I hope that on September the 20th, in fact, I ask you on September the 20th to make a different choice and vote for the NDP.
Marianne?
Thank you, everyone, for being here tonight and for Kings for hosting this discussion. The Green Party believes climate change is the most pressing issue of this election. The Green Party of Canada wants a future that is full of prosperity, not fear. It is time to do things differently. We need actions that allow Canadians to participate, but we need government to set the stage for success. The Green Party of Canada has been talking about climate change for decades, and we have solutions. We can succeed with technology that has already been developed. These solutions aren't sexy. They don't have a lot of flash or create millions of dollars for multinational corporations, but they will work. First, the cheapest form of energy is the energy you don't waste. We can save up to 50% of energy usage just by increasing the energy efficiency of our buildings, our vehicles, and our businesses. Second, we need to invest government spending in green job creation, not in fossil fuel development. The Green Party aims to put a climate lens on all decisions to determine if an action will help or hinder the climate crisis. Climate change is already having a negative impact on the health of Canadians due to extreme heat, respiratory issues from poor air quality, and increasing disease and mental health concerns. But the climate emergency can also be the greatest opportunity of our time. Climate solutions are healthy solutions, and good health is our most precious gift.
Thank you, Marianne. Peter?
Well, thank you very much for the invitation. It's great to be back at King's, an institution that had a tremendous role in shaping me as a person without question. And it's great to see colleagues that I worked with over the years. I look forward to the opportunity to engage with everyone after the event. My message tonight, everyone, is quite simple. During difficult times, you want someone that's been there. That is true of myself. That's true of other local members of parliament who have served their community time and again in this pandemic. I haven't done that alone. I've worked with other elected leaders at the municipal and provincial level to make sure that when people were down, that someone had their back. And that's exactly what I did. And that's exactly what our office did during the pandemic. Literally thousands of people assisted, individuals, families, and businesses. I want to see that effort through. I'm committed to it. And I want to thank especially the students for having the energy to organize a debate during a pandemic. I know it's not easy, but tonight's about engagement. I'm not going to elaborate on policy here. There'll be a lot of time to do that in the questions that are coming. So I look forward to that. And thank you very much.
That is all for the introductions. We will now be moving on to the student submitted questions. This first question is for Durka, and the rebuttal will be from Marianne. The question is, as a young person, I am increasingly concerned about the access to housing. How will you ensure that I am one day able to afford a home And what will you do to ensure that investments made by older Canadians are protected?
Hi, thank you for that important question. You know, home is a place of safety, and everyone should have a safe, affordable home. And I agree, too many people are struggling to make ends meet. Under Justin Trudeau, you know, the price of homes have increased by 55%. And we've got a plan to invest right now 500,000 quality homes that are energy efficient. If you buying your first home, we will make sure that the amortization period is longer so that you can have lower payments and be able to afford it. We also want to invest fast start funds for co-op housing and nonprofit housing as well.
Thank you, Dirka. And your rebuttal, Marianne?
Sure, I think everyone here agrees that affordable housing is something that we will all work towards. But we also need to be talking about regulations in terms of looking at how we don't commodify housing and make it more of a business than an investment.
Okay. And Dirka, your response?
Yes, I quite agree. We have an issue with commodification of housing, and that is why we will use any available federal lands that are unused, vacant, to help with the efforts to build affordable housing.
Okay, thank you. This next question will be for Mary Ann with a rebuttal by Peter. The question is, as of July 20th, only 26% of Canadians supported an election this fall. Canadians are worried about the timing of this event as Canada is currently facing a fourth wave of COVID-19. What are your opinions on Justin Trudeau calling this election? Do you think it was necessary? Your 45 seconds begins now.
The Green Party does not support the calling of this election. As we can see, we're still in the midst of a pandemic, and we see long lineups at the polling stations, and people have been calling saying that it is very difficult for them to vote. It's a very tight election, so everything is really rushed, and it doesn't leave time for the in-depth kind of talk that we need to have, because we are now in a climate emergency, and we need to have real in-depth conversations about what needs to happen. It's not something that can be done very quickly with sound bites.
Peter, your response?
The most important thing that a government can introduce and a parliament can work on is a budget. That budget was introduced in April and almost didn't pass. It did pass on the last sitting day of parliament in June. Faced with that situation, I think the government, and especially the prime minister, looked at what was going on and said, if we, at the political level, have such a tough time passing something so seminal, what other challenges will we face by way of necessary legislation? That's why we have an election, to clear the air around COVID, and we're putting it in people's hands.
Your response, Marianne?
The Green Party is all about collaboration. And in a minority government situation, we see around the world that when people work together, we get better solutions. Requiring a majority in order to get things done your way is not the Canadian way. We need to be changing our political environment so that people aren't antagonistic in Parliament.
Thank you. This next question is for Peter, and the rebuttal will be from Dirka. Based on Health Canada data last updated September 10th, 67.8% of Canadians are vaccinated. What are some methods Parliament could implement to improve vaccination rates nationwide? And what measures would you or your party implement to ensure safe reopenings?
As I just finished saying, and thank you for the question, I think it is the central issue of this campaign. That is, how do we turn the page on the fourth wave of the pandemic to make sure we don't have a fifth, so that we can finally be rid of COVID and we can go back to normal. The heart of our campaign, at the heart of our platform, is a call for mandatory vaccines. One wants to use rail, if one wants to use airplanes, that's fine. They also belong to a society, and it's expected that they be double vaccinated. We're running on that. The Conservatives aren't even here tonight. One of the reasons, I'm sure, is they don't want to deal with that question.
Great. Dirka, your response?
Okay, the NDP since the beginning of this pandemic has been calling for 10 paid sick days. And it's pretty cynical that 10 paid sick days weren't offered by your government until the election. We also want to improve, looking forward, improve our capacity to deal with future pandemics. In 2019, there was a public agency that looked after the Global Public Health Intelligence Network that looked after pandemic planning. We need to bring that back.
Sorry. Peter, your rebuttal.
Thank you. Ms. Pro, 80% of the emergency response of government in this country by way of financing the response to COVID has come from the federal government, the CERB, the wage subsidy for businesses, the rent subsidy for businesses. We were there for people, and we will continue to be there for people through a costed platform, something that's not true of the NDP.
Thank you. This next question is for Durga, and the rebuttal will be from Peter. Currently, there is a devastating COVID-19 crisis unfolding in the developing world. What should Canada do to contribute to global vaccine equity?
Okay, and the Liberal government has put Canada as part of that COVAX facility, which is international. And the NDP believes in multilateralism. It would be only fair to make sure that developing and underdeveloped nations get equitable access to vaccines. Canada benefited by extracting from that facility, so it should return in kind. Another thing is trying to make sure that it does its part to fight the climate crisis, because what I'm hearing is that future pandemics may come because we have a stressed ecosystem.
Thank you. Peter, your rebuttal.
Canada is among the world leaders in terms of helping developing nations confront COVID. We have to continue to be there. This is a responsibility. Our first responsibility, of course, is to Canadians, but we have to be there for the people of the developing world because we won't be rid of the pandemic until that happens, and it is happening. We will continue to assist through the COVAX facility, excuse me.
And Durga?
Well, one of the other things that you can do to help future resilience for COVID recovery for developed countries is increase the amount of money that is given to foreign assistance. Right now, it's only 1/3 of a cent of every dollar, and the United Nations is calling for 0.7% of GDP.
Thank you. The next question is for Marianne, and the rebuttal will be from Durga. In Ontario, we have some of the highest student debt in the country. The cost of student debt were problematic before the pandemic, but now COVID has acted as another obstacle for students. How does your party plan on helping students pay off their loans without putting themselves in further debt?
Education is a fundamental human right. We know that the future economy will require an educated workforce. It used to be enough to have a high school education, not anymore. Universal access to quality post-secondary education and skills training is a right, not a privilege, and will position Canadians for success in the clean and just economy. The average student graduated with $28,000 of debt, and with rising housing costs, this is unaffordable. A Green government will abolish post-secondary education tuition, remove the 2% cap on education funding for Indigenous students, expand opportunities for reskilling and retraining, and support post-secondary institutions to provide new innovative academic offerings like Western's new climate change major. London is well positioned to leverage the skills and talents available at both Western and Fanshawe.
Thank you. Durga, your rebuttal?
Will a Green government commit to, as 5 provinces already shown some leadership, taking the interest of a student loans that takes the profit away and eventually making student loans free? Student loans as a thing of the past by making tuition free, sorry.
Thank you.
We think it's not just taking the tuition away, but also increasing the access. And we would allocate $10 billion to post-secondary and trade school supports to ensure that there are the programming to help with innovation in the green economy.
Thank you. This next question will be for Peter with a rebuttal from Marianne. In 2011, the National Assessment of First Nations Water and Wastewater completed found that 73% of water systems in First Nation reserves are at a high or medium risk. As long-term boil water advisories are not the solution, how will you ensure that the Indigenous communities have access to safe, clean drinking water?
Thank you very much. If COVID-19 is the challenge of the moment, the challenge of our time is climate change, and closely related to it, reconciliation. Since 2015, over 100 boil water advisories on reserves have been lifted. That is a unique achievement that no government in this country's history has achieved. We need to keep going. It requires painstaking work because what you have to have is governments working together. We're talking about federal government, but also Indigenous leadership. That's exactly what is happening. Going into Indigenous communities, working with Indigenous leaders, and putting in place new water purification systems. When I say new, I really mean it. In most cases, those systems have to be put into place completely from the beginning because previous governments, and I won't be partisan on this, Liberal and Conservative have let down First Nations people. We need to continue this issue together.
Thank you.
We have a First Nations community just 10 minutes from London who is under a boil water advisory. It is a multi-government responsibility, including the municipal government, but the federal government has not been working near enough. Peter, what have you done specifically to help move the crisis in our local First Nations boil water advisories?
Thank you for that question. I've been engaged with local Indigenous leaders on a range of issues, and if I have the honor of being reelected, I'll continue that effort. We also have a fully costed platform, a platform that makes clear how we're going to pay for the continuation of this effort. It's an approach that's been endorsed by Perry Belgrade, the former, arguably the most important leader from an Indigenous perspective in the country. And just the other day, the national Métis leader, Mr. Obed, endorsed what the Liberals have done. We need to continue this work.
Thank you. This next question will be for Durka with a rebuttal from Peter. Climate change is now more apparent in Canada with the rising seawater, wildfires, and increases in temperature. What are your specific plans for helping to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by an ample amount, and how will you fund and implement them?
Thank you for that question. So one of the first things that the NDP will do is stop all fossil fuel subsidies. We will instead take that money and invest it in good clean jobs as a transition to the renewable economy based on renewables. Our reduction target for emissions is 50%, which is what the UN Special Envoy on Climate Change says is the minimum that is required. We are prepared to take the action that we may have to leave some of that oil in the ground, and we will not go through with the TMX.
Peter?
There's a great deal in the NDP platform that I agree with. What I cannot agree with and can never understand is why the NDP platform, particularly on climate change, is not costed. Or if it is, it hasn't survived any serious analysis. It recently received a 2 out of 10. The climate change policies of the NDP received a 20% score. Ours received an 8 out of 10 by leading observers, leading researchers, people in the environmental sector that have looked at this and want to see the government continue its work.
Just because a climate economist concerned with fossil fuels, who is not a climatologist, says that it's okay, doesn't mean it is. The Green Platform and the NDP platform are looking at deep carbonization, not market-based methods like the Liberals and Conservatives. Further, over 500 environmentalists have complained that have asked the Liberal government to stop funding carbon capture technology because it prolongs the use of fossil fuels, which is not what we need to get 50% reduction in greenhouse gases.
The next question will be for Marianne with a rebuttal from Durka. Canadians have been exploited by the telecommunication companies in Canada, such as Rogers and Bell, for years. What are your party's approach to providing Canadians affordable and reliable networks in an era where they are necessary to life and to work?
Well, I think this is a very important question because we have seen even within this election how everything has gone virtual and how there is still a lot of instability within the internet access just within the Greater London area, notwithstanding things across the country. I recently actually took the train across Ontario, And for about 95% of the train ride, there was no internet access. This is crucial to make climate change adaptations where people are working from home, increase flexibility of people's work lives to be able to work where they are. And it is important to make it affordable for all Canadians.
Thank you. Durga?
COVID has made it abundantly clear that internet and telephone services are really necessary. It's an equity issue because people who live just in St. Thomas and in environs south of London do not have proper internet access. We will commit to making sure we have a national company to produce broadband internet across the country, a Crown Corporation, and also capped capped cell phone bills. Thank you.
The Conservatives often talk about market forces and that the market will make everything work out wonderfully. But the Green Party believes that there also needs to be regulation, because without regulation, there is no incentive for people to do things beyond the minimum. So we would be looking to add some regulations to the Canadian internet and telecom field.
Thank you. The next question is for Peter with a rebuttal from Marianne. Access to affordable public transit is a key way of fighting climate change, yet we see funding commitments routinely used as a campaigning ploy. What mass rapid transit initiatives that will benefit London do you support, and what are their infrastructure projects that you believe are a waste of resources?
Using transit as a campaign ploy is something true of other parties for sure. But if you look at what the Liberal government has done in the past 6 years almost, you're talking about the most serious approach to public transit the country has ever seen. No less than $25 billion invested in public transit. $200 million, 200 plus million actually, was allocated to the City of London. It's one of the things that I hold up as something I worked on with others, of course, to improve our local transit system. And I had students in mind when I did it for sure, among others.
One of the things that municipalities are challenged with is having stable, dependable funding instead of Christmas presents that come during election times. So the Green Party would allocate 1% of GST to municipal infrastructure projects like transit and housing. We have an issue right now being decided at council about road widening. We need more leadership on the federal side in terms of creating climate-friendly transit.
There's a lot of what the Green Party says that I agree with, and having that stability in terms of funding for public transit is part of that. That's why it's part of our platform. To progressives out there and in the room and watching online, the Conservative Party, which could form office in a few days, it is a possibility, has said one thing on public transit, that if they are elected, public transit would continue. That's all they've said. So that's the assurance that we have from Aaron O'Toole, that they would continue public transit. That's not good enough.
Thank you. The next question will be for Durga with a rebuttal from Peter. Given the severity of the Yemen humanitarian crisis, how will your party respond to remedy the crisis while still preserving the London economy, which is reliant on trade of light armored vehicles to Saudi Arabia through General Dynamics?
Did you say the question is
Sorry.
for Durga or?
Sorry, that was for Durga with a rebuttal from Peter.
Right.
All right. It is lamentable that Canada has become involved in one of what the United Nations calls one of the worst humanitarian crises that the world has ever seen. And the Liberal government had the chance when they came in 2015 to cancel that project, and they chose not to. And more pain and suffering has since ensued. The NDP believes in an approach of human rights, of multilateralism, and peace and good government. And we will immediately stop all arms sales to Saudi Arabia and instead convert the production to transit projects, such as our plan to have a high-speed rail along the Quebec-Windsor corridor.
Thank you, Peter.
The idea just proposed by Ms. Prout has been looked at by the company and they wouldn't do it. It doesn't fit within their business model. The reality is, and we just heard it from Ms. Prout, the NDP is proposing canceling thousands of jobs in this community, manufacturing jobs, well-paying jobs, in London and southwestern Ontario. The truth is that this matter has been looked at not by politicians, but by our independent public service in the Department of Global Affairs. Labs produced in London have not been used against human rights, not in Saudi Arabia, not in Yemen. We'll continue to be there for Yemen through humanitarian assistance for sure.
Thank you, Peter. Your response, Durga?
There's incontrovertible evidence, photographic evidence on top of that, that these LAVs have been used in the conflict in Yemen. And we have a moral hazard here. And I think we should extricate our citizens from that and do something that provides utility for the common good of all humanity. All that weapons do is constantly kill. And to be profitable, you have to sell more and kill more people. Whereas moving people to jobs and to go and visit grandma and to come to this university from another province is a
Thank you,
better
Durga.
investment in
Thank
our
you.
services.
This next question will be for Marianne with a response from Durga. What is your party actively doing in the case of the two Michaels in China? What pressure would they bring to pursue more active efforts to get them released? It's for Marianne.
Thank you. A very good question, because I was actually campaigning in the neighborhood recently and saw that the number of days that the Michaels have been in custody. And the Greens are actually a global party with connections to Greens around the world. So we actually have the ability to collaborate and negotiate internationally, and we would certainly support any effort to bring the Michaels home. Yeah, I don't have any specifics on that one though.
Durga?
I think one of the things that the NDP certainly believes in is having dialogue. And it must be open dialogue and sustained. We have to understand the cultural dimensions of the Chinese. They are not a culture that is new, they're established, and they work on a system of trust. And I think that trust probably has been broken with the treatment of Meng Wanzhou.
Thank you, Durga.
I think it also highlights our relationship with the United States, and that we often find ourselves in difficult situations because of issues that are also in conflict, countries that are in conflict with the US, and we get sort of tied into those. So it's working diplomatically to try to ensure that the safety of Canadians is of paramount importance.
Thank you. This will be our last question for this section, and then we will be taking a 2-minute break. So this is for Peter with a rebuttal from Marianne. It has been argued that Canada lost its bid for a non-permanent seat on the UN Security Council because of a decline in its commitment to the international community. This appears to indicate a disconnect between Canada's self-image as a middle power and a strong multilateral player and the international community's perception of Canada in the international system. If this is a fair assessment, what is or should Canada be doing with its foreign policy to increase its international engagement, remedy this perception, and renew its commitment to the international community?
Well, with great respect, and you said if there, so I'm glad you did, because I take issue with the premise of the question. I think that if we look at Canadian foreign policy and specifically Canadian development policy, what we see is an approach that focuses on uplifting. For example, I had the opportunity in 2016 to go to Israel. I went to the West Bank as well. I went to Jordan too, and I saw Canadian development assistance at work, helping people in need, refugees in need, but also, let me just leave you with this example, a school for the visually impaired, put in place and maintained by Canadian aid dollars. We're helping to fund solar panels in the school so that school can keep operating. That's the kind of work Canada can do. We're a middle power, we ought to recognize that, and we ought to be building schools and hospitals, and that's what we're doing. That's what we're going to continue to do.
Marianne?
We saw with the Conservative Harper government years ago that they cut the international development funds from Canada, and also really cut the legs out of a lot of nonprofit organizations like Kairos, who do great work internationally. And by reducing the exposure and the participation of Canadians abroad does nothing to help our reputation in the world. We are proud to be peacekeepers and keep our international friends in mind.
Thank you very much. We just heard the Harper years. Marianne, I couldn't agree more. And that's what we could see yet again with an O'Toole government. That's why I appeal once more to progressives to look at the Liberal agenda, a serious agenda. There's been 6 years of government. Yes, the government has made some mistakes along the way. I won't deny that. But the reality is that an O'Toole government presents a rehash of the Harper years. And we all know what that means by way of Canadian foreign policy and development policy. We're a middle power, as I said before. We ought to embrace our responsibility, and that's what we're doing on the global stage now.
Thank you. That concludes section 1 of the pre-prepared student questions. We'll now take a short 2-minute recess, and we'll begin again with the questions between the candidates. Thank you. Thank you for waiting. So we will now begin section 2, where candidates are asking each other questions. We'll begin with Durka asking 1 question, followed by Marianne and Peter, and then we'll cycle through that again. Just a refresher, the candidate asking the question will have 15 seconds. There will be 45 seconds from the respondent, and then a 30-second rebuttal, and then yet another 30-second rebuttal. Durka, you may ask your question whenever you're ready.
So this question is for Peter. Londoners have struggled to pay their bills this pandemic, whether that's rent or for the medication. Yet you and Trudeau voted against the NDP's motion to implement pharmacare. How could you vote against these policies that would dramatically improve the lives of Londoners?
Well, Ms. Prout, let me just set the record straight. What we voted against was an approach to pharmacare that wouldn't work because it would prove impossible, because the way that the NDP had phrased the motion in Parliament that it presented was that it imposed a pharmacare system on provinces, and obviously healthcare being their area of jurisdiction just wasn't on. We heard that from several different premiers, in fact, that the NDP proposal would not work. What would work is the way that the Liberal government has approached it, which is to sit down and negotiate province by province. In fact, we already have a case of that. One's been an agreement's already been concluded with Prince Edward Island, and it will serve as the model for the rest of the country. In fact, we believe in pharmacare, and we're going to get it done in a meaningful way that recognizes the dynamics of Canadian federalism.
The fact is, you've been in government for 6 years. And if you really believed in pharmacare, you had a partner with the NDP, and we could have achieved that. We've noticed that your platform also does not have a budget or timeline for universal pharmacare. In fact, it barely mentioned it, and it doesn't mention anything about a pricing plan to reduce drugs.
Ms. Prout,
Cost of drugs, I should say.
Ms. Prout, with all due respect, we've already seen the government move in the direction of making universal pharmacare a reality. There was something that happened in between that prevented the conclusion of that policy, and that is the pandemic. If it wasn't for the pandemic, I believe that we would be much further along. Would we have concluded an agreement with every single province? I'm not sure about that, but certainly the pandemic, being the biggest crisis the country's ever faced since World War II, necessitated the government's full attention, and that's why we've seen the government respond. Thousands of people in this city alone assisted along the way, and I'm going to continue to be there for those people.
Thank you. Marianne, you may ask your question.
I will ask it of Durka. The Greens and NDP often have similar platform ideas on social justice, but have different ideas about climate change solutions. In 2019 platform, the NDP thought fracking was still okay. I was not able to find any references to fracking this election, but was concerned to read that you would allow new coal mines and mine expansion projects. The Greens have promised to ban thermal coal. How do you reconcile new coal with getting to net zero?
And thank you very much for your questions. And yes, indeed, our platforms are very similar. And as I suggested before, we're looking at decarbonization. The thing about it is, we do recognize that we have to have more stringent goals with respect to achieving greenhouse gas emission reductions. And certainly if it needs, given the recent IPCC guidance that about 90% of coal has to stay in the ground and 60% of fossil fuel. The NDP platform does want to be guided by science-based and scientific and evidence-based methods. And so if it is the case that we have to do a course correction from what is in our platform is just the minimum.
Well, coal is one of the worst greenhouse gas emitters next to methane. And if you're talking about decarbonization and the speed at which we need to transition to a clean economy, it would seem that coal would not factor into the equation at all. The Greens work very closely, both provincially and federally. How do you explain the NDP's provincial decisions to support coal?
Well, I guess the NDP provincially is a different entity. They have their own ways and means of being. I am running at the federal level. As I said, the federal NDP's climate plan is going to be guided by scientific evidence. And the evidence we have received in the last week or so from the IPCC says a lot of fossil fuels must be left in the ground.
Thank you. Now, Peter, your first question.
Thank you very much. The question is to Ms. Prout. Ms. Prout, I mentioned the NDP Climate Plan earlier. It has come under, I mean, there's many promises there. I won't deny that, but it has come under such criticism, in part because there's no way to pay for the various promises. In fact, so critical, so it's come under such criticism, rather, that even Tom Mulcair, your party's former leader, has endorsed the Liberal plan. How will the NDP pay for their many promises on climate change?
Well, I guess Tom Mulcair is returning to his roots as a Liberal. The thing about the NDP climate plan, as I mentioned before, is that it is one that's focused on deep decarbonization and also making that transition in a way that is just, not only for workers in the fossil fuel industry, but the communities in which they live and the marginalized communities. We have a plan to pay, and with unlimited zeal, we will be taxing the rich 1%. We will also be increasing corporate taxes from 15% to 18%. We will look at an increase to the capital gains from 50 to 75. And all of that, including closing loopholes, will bring in $166 billion. We have a plan and it is there for you to see.
The Liberals are also proposing to raise taxes on banks and insurance firms that earn a revenue greater of $1 billion. We will do that too, and we can look very seriously at this issue of taxing billionaires more. Unfortunately, with the NDP, they've put all their energy into that particular proposal. Where this has been tried, the tax on the super rich in places like Western Europe, it has failed because it hasn't generated enough revenue to take care of the particular government in question, the particular governments that have gone down this road, their many policies. And with the NDP, there's not enough revenue that would come in to deal with that climate change plan, if you want to call it a plan, with all due respect.
It is very much so a plan. First of all, as I mentioned, the IPCC has stated that we must have at least 50% carbon in greenhouse gas emission. We are at that target. The Liberals are below that. In addition, the Liberals will continue to use nuclear energy. That has a severe disposal problem, and we will not be that is not a feature of our plan.
Ndp, you may now ask your second question.
Okay, this question is for Mr. Fragiskados. The Liberals have talked a good game on women's rights, but when push comes to shove, you have failed to protect Clinic 554 and used government money to fund anti-abortion groups. London is a pro-choice city that believes in women's right to choose. Why is your government giving money to organizations trying to take that choice away?
Ms. Prout, you're referring to emergency programs put in place at the height of the pandemic, where thousands of organizations were in need and asked for the wage subsidy. So faced with that situation, the government wanted to help as many families as possible and did not go through a values test. It is true, but the context of the pandemic needs to be front and center when trying to understand that. The platform of the Liberal Party makes reproductive rights and a woman's right to choose fundamental. We are a party that embraces both of those things. The reality is that the O'Toole, if it is a government, the O'Toole Conservatives would waver from that. I've seen them in Parliament. Every opportunity they have, the vast majority of their MPs are social conservatives, and they would push back against a woman's right to choose. That cannot happen. We will continue to embrace a woman's right to choose.
Now, one question I must ask is why weren't you using your voice to stop this? This is not a theoretical question for London women like me. If I was your MP, I'd be standing up to make sure these organizations aren't getting money to spread their lies. Why aren't you?
On that specific question, I have absolutely put my voice forward. I've spoken with constituents who had the concern and put it directly to government. If you look at my record, though, and there is a record of experience of 6 years, at every opportunity I've defended a woman's right to choose and reproductive rights. It's an issue of human rights, it's an issue of healthcare, and we would absolutely defend a woman's right to choose in everything that we do, Ms. Pro.
Marianne, your next question.
Peter, the House of Commons Standing Committee on Environment and Sustainable Development did a review of the Canadian Environmental Protection Act in 2017. Those recommendations are still not law. You claim it is hard to get things done in a minority government, yet you had a majority at the time. A climate emergency was declared in 2019. Why does this take so long to get legislation passed in an emergency? And will you prioritize this if you form the next government?
We will continue to look at any recommendation that is brought forward by a standing committee, whether it's on the environment or anything else, Marianne. It is absolutely the challenge of our time, as I said. And if you look at the government's record, in fact, we've listened to some of the things that the Environment Committee has suggested. Electrifying transit, that is in motion. Moving towards providing a rebate for individuals so they can, so as to incentivize the purchase of electric cars. Investing heavily in public transit, moving towards net zero, legislating that, in fact. All of that has happened in 6 short years, and we want to continue the effort. We have turned back the Harper agenda, and in fact, it's Andrew Weaver, the former leader of the BC Green Party, I think you know this, Ms. Hodge, who's embraced the Liberal Climate Plan. I mean, he has lauded it as the best climate plan in the Western world.
You mentioned earlier that COVID is the biggest emergency we've had since World War II. Many people consider the climate crisis similar to the effort that we need to put forward as it was another world war, because the impacts are going to be that great. So you have had a record of slow implementation of a lot of these projects. How do you see moving forward in an emergency situation to how can we accelerate some of these changes?
Well, I think we need to keep going on the agenda that we're on, Ms. Hodge. If you look at the government's actions on climate change, we put a price on carbon, the first federal government ever to do so, provide a rebate along the way to make sure that that price on carbon is affordable. I mentioned electrifying transit. I've worked closely with the mayor of this city and others to ensure that we have that in the future. It's a real possibility, electrifying London's transit fleet. The over 40 charging infrastructure stations that you see in the city of London for cars, that's made possible because of the federal Liberal government's investment. There is a long list of achievements when it comes to a climate change plan. We need to continue.
Thank you. Peter, you may now ask your final question.
It goes to Ms. Hodge. I know we don't know each other very well, Marianne, but it's been very good to get to know you in this campaign, and I'd like that for that to certainly continue. I want to ask you specifically, and this is if I have the ability and if I have the honor of serving again as the Member of Parliament. I know that you believe in electrification specifically. We can talk about transit, we can talk about cars, but electrification in general. What are some of the challenges that still exist on the subject of electrification that the government could put in place by way of policy to help alleviate those challenges so that we have electrification embraced across the country?
Well, there are 2 challenges. One is infrastructure and the other is supply. So as we know that there's a worldwide shortage of microchips, which doesn't help the situation right now, but it just makes a bad situation even worse. I know people who are waiting like 1.5 years to get an electric vehicle. We need pressure to be put on the vehicle manufacturers, and I know Ford is coming out with something, but we are in an emergency, so things need to happen faster. When people want to do the right thing and can't because there are barriers, that is a problem. Like, we need all hands on deck, and be able to do everything that people want to happen should be easy for them to do.
It'll be a short rebuttal. I just think progressives need to work together, and we're going to have issues that we disagree on, but this is something that I want to continue to do, which is consult people that I respect in the community. I know how passionate you are on climate change. I did the same with Carol Dick when she ran, and she did provide some really good advice on banning single-use plastics, which we've moved towards doing. So thank you.
You can have her say something else
sorry.
if you'd like, Marianne.
It's also, there's the education part that because we're not hearing the government talking in a way that makes it sound like we're in an emergency, people are not taking this seriously. The same thing that we saw with pandemics, the experts said for years, we're going to have a pandemic, and then governments like fired all of the head guys, and now we're in a pandemic. So we need to be proactive. We need leadership from the government to be starting to talk in ways that people know this is an emergency and how they can respond.
Thank you. That concludes section 2 of our 3-part debate. We'll take yet another 2-minute recess, and then we will continue with audience questions. We have a mic onto your right side of the room. If you guys would like to start queuing up whenever you're available, please still respect social distancing requirements. So that will begin in 2 minutes. Thank you. Okay, we will now begin with the audience questions. We will begin on this side of the room. So you'll have 20 seconds, and then each candidate, the candidates you are addressing will have 40 seconds.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jessica. I'm in 4th year here at King's, and my question is first for Mr. Fragiskados. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing that.
Yeah, not at all.
With the post-COVID economy being surrounded by uncertainty and fears of inflation, what will each of you do to put Canadians at ease and create prosperity?
Thank you very much. And again, don't worry about the last name. It was perfect, by the way, for what it's worth. As far as what we would do to address issues of affordability, I think that's what you're talking about. First, on inflation, basically when an economy craters as it did as a result of the pandemic, there's nowhere to go but up. That's why we have some inflation in the Canadian economy. But the governor of the Bank of Canada has said there's nothing to worry about here, and he's a Western graduate, so we should listen to him. The other thing I'll say is that if you look at the Liberal platform, there's a couple things there. I've got probably 20 seconds left. So $10 a day childcare. I know that doesn't apply to most people in this room, but it will perhaps someday. $10 a day childcare is a huge game changer. For every dollar that we invest in the economy as government, we get $3 back. There's also making the purchasing of homes more affordable, which I'll probably deal with another question. Thank you.
And this side.
Hi, my name is Claire, and I'm a 4th year student here at King's. And my question is for Durga. There's an increasing calls to have proof of vaccination for an increasing number of spaces, or even mandates, or even mandated vaccination for every Canadian. What is your stance on vaccine mandates? Should it be for specific activities or implemented everywhere?
Thank you. This is a very serious health crisis, one we haven't seen in just over 100 years. And so what's even scary now is that in the face of a 4th wave and the Delta variant, people are rightly worried. That means we have to work hard to make it easier for people to get a shot, and making sure that the lack of access to internet and transportation or a day off work to keep people from getting the vaccine is not a hindrance. This is why we'd like to see 10 paid sick days so that people can take some time off to get vaccinated. And that's where all our efforts need to be focused. The NDP thinks that workers and unions can help in this effort and should be involved in any plans for mandatory vaccination. Thank you.
Thank you. In the back of the room.
Hello, my name is Kagan. I'm a 1st year student at King's, and my question is for Peter. So just quickly, I'd like if you could explain the Liberal Party's perspective on why the housing crisis is occurring and what specifically you will do to address it. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Kagan. There's many factors involved. First, we have a supply issue, and that's why we need to work with municipalities. Obviously, they're in charge of residential zoning. We need more land to be made available for the construction of homes. A re-elected Liberal government would see over the next 5 years 1.4 million homes built, and we need to, again, consult municipalities on how to best do that. We also need to consult the real estate sector and the home builders associations across the country to make that a reality. As far as how we would respond in other ways, a tax-free savings account to help young people. Anyone under the age of 40 would have the ability to create such an account. They can put up to $40,000 in it and put it towards a down payment, getting rid of speculative practices like flipping as well and foreign buying that has left homes vacant and therefore driven up the cost. That's what we'll do, among other things, on housing.
Thank you. This side?
All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Victoria. I'm in my 3rd year here at King's. My question is a general question to anyone who'd like to answer. How will the rollout for COVID booster shots work? Will it work similar to when the initial vaccine was rolled out? So examples starting with the elderly and at risk, or will priority go to those who work or are active in the public realm? So for example, retail, restaurant, construction, taxi workers. Thank you.
I just spoke, so if I would like to answer,
I
but
just missed the first part of the question. I couldn't hear it properly.
Sorry, I was just asking how the COVID vaccine booster shots will work, like the rollout plan.
Okay. In terms of equity, the COVID vaccine booster shot should be given first to immunocompromised individuals. As I alluded to in my earlier response to a question about vaccination, I would rather see a distribution to people in the developed and developing world so that their economies are not further affected and that they can participate. Because if that doesn't happen, it becomes a drag on the international economic order. Thank you.
In terms of the rollout, as Durga outlined, it should be really a voluntary participation and by people who are most likely to be affected by that. But I also wanted to take the opportunity to talk about the fact that we have become dependent on other countries for things like developing vaccines. And we have seen cuts, especially from the previous Conservative government, who have muzzled scientists and cut funding for research. And the Green Party would increase spending on R&D from 1.7% of the GDP to 2.5%, which is what the average is around the world.
just very quickly, it's a great question, but we have to recognize federal jurisdiction and provincial jurisdiction. So what the Liberal government would do is ensure that every Canadian that needs a booster gets a booster and doesn't have to pay for it. We would work with provinces in terms of the distribution. So the federal government's in charge of procuring vaccines, and we distribute to provinces, and provinces distribute to local communities in partnership with local health agencies. So it's really the specifics of the booster question, which is not an unimportant issue. It's very important, but it's left in the hands of local health agencies and provincial governments. On Marianne's point, just 10 seconds here. It is true that previous governments did neglect the need for domestic manufacturing capacity. What this government has now done, recognizing that pandemics can happen again, unfortunately, it is a reality, is we've invested heavily to ensure that we have that capacity. We've got a facility in North York, in Quebec, and in Western Canada, and we're getting it done.
Thank you. A question from the back of the room.
Hi, I'm Alexa. I'm a third-year student at King's, and my question is for Ms. Prout. So a 2020 study showed that 1 in 4 women attending post-secondary school have been sexually assaulted. Western University is located in London North Centre, and during the first week back to school, we have already seen this problem in action. What would you do to address and prevent sexual assault on university campuses and for post-secondary students in general? Differently, since I asked a similar question at this debate 2 years ago.
Okay, Thank you, Alexa. First of all, if anybody has friends or knows the people who have been affected by the four sexual assaults that we know of, there might be more. I hope that you're getting help, and I sympathize with you. The NDP plans to bring in a national plan to fight gender-based violence. In it has a special provision to deal with violence on campus, as you rightly noted. Just over 10% of women who attend university, particularly in their first year, are victims of gender-based violence. We also know that London is a sex trafficking hub, and there are a lot of Indigenous women who are victims of sex trafficking, over proportion. And so our plan to address gender-based violence will also address that as well.
Thank you. We'll take 2 questions from this side of the room.
Hello, my name is Ava. I'm currently my 3rd year at King's. My question is directed to Mary Ann Hodge. My question is, when it comes to fighting climate change, many focus on national and international initiative. What on a local level can you do to best address climate change?
Oh, some people might think that I paid you to ask that question because I am a community activist, and I am part of a group called Climate Action London. You can find us at climateactionlondon.ca. And we advocate for all kinds of climate action, big and small. So you can, whatever level or whatever interest you have in terms of climate action, there's something there for you. We advocate to local government, and actually tonight we have people who are engaged in a conversation with City Council who are voting right as we speak, probably on whether they're going to allow the widening of Wonderland Road and Adelaide Streets to continue with, whereas we are saying it's a climate emergency, and so we are holding the City of London accountable to their declaration of a climate emergency to see how that can actually be implemented within the city and in ways as diverse as planting pollinator gardens.
Thank you.
And another question.
Hi, my name is Cassandra. I'm a 3rd year student at King's. My question is like a general question directed to anyone who wants to answer it. Getting Canada back to work is of paramount importance in our recovery, yet your parties vary in their approach to ensure women have equal access to the labor market. Can you explain why your party's approach to childcare is best suited for Canadians today?
Sure, if I could. $10 a day childcare. We have to make it a reality, and it's almost a reality, in fact. We have 8 agreements on childcare already concluded. We still need Mr. Ford to come to the table in a meaningful way, although I'm hearing through the grapevine, so to speak, the political grapevine, that he's serious about getting it done, and that will come hopefully sooner rather than later. As I said before, for every dollar invested in childcare, $3 are created in the economy. This is something that women have fought for so long. We've seen benefits already in Quebec and other countries where it's been tried. It's been a tremendous economic boost, and it's about justice too, making sure that women have that opportunity. In London, $1,200 per day, per month, $1,200 per month goes towards childcare, $15,000 a year. That ends with a re-elected Liberal government.
Marianne?
Yes, the Green Party does support affordable and available childcare policies, because the Conservative program, which is about just providing dollars, is not sufficient, because dollars don't help when you can't find adequate childcare in your neighborhood that is available to you and that you are comfortable with. So it's providing a platform where the supply can be enhanced, and that comes with respecting the work of childcare workers and ensuring that they are paid a adequate wage so that these jobs are celebrated in our community instead of marginalized.
Thank you, Cassandra. That's an important question because what we have seen with this pandemic is really a secession, as Armenia Yazinian had said. And so the NDP is also in support of $10 a day universal childcare. The other thing that we think women also need are changes in EI. We know that people who apply for EI, only 40% of them get it. And because women are concentrated more in part-time employment, that they disproportionately are turned down when they apply. So we want to make it easier for them to get unemployment insurance. We also recognize that in addition to childcare, women also have the burden sometimes of caring for elder parents. And so we have a caregiver tax credit as well. Thank you.
And a question from the back of the room.
Hello, my name is Thomas. I teach here, and my question is for Peter. Peter, you know that class disparities have really emerged during this pandemic, and students have really been affected by this. I'm wondering, what would you do if you were elected to ensure that students from this riding are not left behind?
Thanks, Tom. And I know how much, we're having worked with you for a little bit, but knowing you better as a person, I know how much you care about students. And that is something that applies to every single King's faculty member here. The reality is, Tom, I ran for public office for many reasons. One reason was to help students. In the pandemic, we put in place a moratorium on interest with respect to student loans. If re-elected, we would lift interest entirely. Another thing that we did was making sure that student grants were more accessible. We did that prior to the pandemic. We focused on middle income and lower income students. That policy would continue, and we would double student grants that already exist at the federal level. There's many other things, Tom, that we could do, investing in research and science, all of these things, including the social sciences, because I'm looking right at David. We need to continue to fund the tri-councils, and within that, open up opportunities for undergraduates to work within the tri-councils with side by side, but with academics.
Thank you.
And we'll take another question from the back of the room.
Hi there, my name is Hannah Mankulich and I'm a second-year student at King's. As this is one of the most pressing issues in Canadian politics at the moment, I would like to ask the question to all three of you. The remains of hundreds of children were discovered at former residential schools in Canada over the past few months, with numerous bodies yet to be found. How will you implement the Truth and Reconciliation Commission calls for action to find these remaining bodies? Thank you.
Durga, do you want to take that one first?
All right. So thank you for this question. We all moved by the finding first that the Seweptech Nation and Kamloops of the bodies of young children. And we've heard many more. It's up to about 6,000. I think we probably don't talk about this enough. The NDP has made in our platform a commitment of massive investments in Indigenous affairs as well as reconciliation. So I think some of that money is going to go towards making sure that they have assistance in finding these graves. But we also have to build trust before we even talk about reconciliation, which means we have to deliver on human rights, give them clean water and proper housing as a start.
The number one thing that we need to recognize is the self-determination of Indigenous peoples and let them lead this conversation and this program at the pace that they see fit and in the way that aligns with their cultures. But we also need to recognize that Indigenous children in residential schools have been replaced by Indigenous children in foster care. Indigenous children account for less than 8% of children in Canada, but over 52% of children in care. We would support kinship ties and ensure sufficient funding and resources so that families are kept together. And we would also increase funding to friendship centers like the Namur and Friendship Center here in London that provide critical social services off reserve and support to First Nations in the area.
We would, of course, continue to support urban-based Indigenous organizations as well. We have a wonderful organization in the city known as ATLOSA, the Namur and Friendship Center that Marianne alludes to. but specifically on the question that you raised, which is so important at this time in the country. The country's been horrified in terms of the residential school legacy and the recovery of remains and that search effort that continues and must continue. The federal government is paying for that effort. We're doing so in consultation with Indigenous leaders and communities and taking our cue from them. As long as there is this desire to carry out the search, the federal government ought to be there. And I want to thank Ms. Prout and Ms. Hodge at every debate that we've taken part in. This issue has come up and they've been unequivocal, and I'll continue to do so as well. Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay. A question from the side?
Hi, my name is Danielle Ross. I'm a third-year student at King's, and my question is aimed at Ms. Prout. What is your stance on Canada increasing the number of refugees from countries like Afghanistan, Yemen, and Haiti? If an influx of refugees is accepted by the federal government, how will you and your constituents support refugees upon their arrival?
Thank you for that question, Tennille. We need a compassionate and fair immigration system because Canada is stronger when we keep families together and help newcomers contribute to our community. Newcomers are still more likely to work in lower paid jobs and struggle to find work in their fields. So we're going to focus on policies that work for all immigrants by keeping them together through faster family unification, and that includes grandparents. We're going to help immigrants contribute to the economy by improving foreign credential recognition. And we're going to do our fair share to welcome refugees fleeing violence and persecution, such as the people from Yemen, Afghanistan, and Haiti, as you've mentioned. Thank you.
From the side again?
Hi, my name is Maddie. I'm a fourth year at King's. My question is to Peter. With the recent withdrawal from Afghanistan, which left Canadians, allies, and refugees behind, what can Canada do as a country to ensure these problems do not arise again? And how can we be more open to refugees for future crises?
Thank you for that. I've had the chance now since the crisis began to work very closely with constituents of Afghan origin in this community who remain obviously deeply worried about family in places like Kabul. What Canada can do is to continue to engage the international community and specifically like-minded allies to assist those who are still trapped in Afghanistan. So far, there's been over 3,000 Afghans that have settled in Canada in 20 communities, including in London. We want to see that effort through. We have also committed, if re-elected, to carry out the resettlement of up to 20,000 Afghan refugees and prioritizing human rights defenders, women leaders, members of the LGBTQ community, among others. We're going to be there, and the model will be based on the Syrian experience, which has proved so successful in Canada.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Sophia. I'm a fourth year here at King's, and my question is directed to Durga. So currently, 2 of the world's foremost humanitarian crises are taking place in the Asia-Pacific region, the genocide against the Muslim Uyghur population of China, as well as a genocide against the Rohingya and military coup in Myanmar. In your opinion, what can or should Canada be doing in response to these situations? And more specifically to Myanmar, do you feel that this represents a failure of the democratization process? Do you feel that there needs to be a shift in how Canada's and other nations approach democratization?
Oh, thank you for that very interesting question. As I mentioned earlier, the NDP is looking at having a foreign policy that's based on human rights, peace and security, and multilateralism. So if there is a conflict going on in a particular country, certainly one of the easiest ways is to find an ally in a group of allies in neighboring countries to have dialogue to try and solve the conflict. Also, the biggest platform for doing multilateralism is the United Nations. It may be necessary and there to put in place other measures to try and avoid conflict that are involved putting people on the ground. but certainly using weapons is not a preferred solution. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Carolina and I teach here. And I have a question for Peter. In your opinion, what is the biggest foreign policy challenge that Canada faces today or will face in the next 50 years?
Thank you for the question. I would say climate change, and let me just speak that through if I could, or talk that through. We have to find consensus in the international community on this issue that is really important for every single state, regardless of their orientation. It will require us, to work not just with democracies, but with countries that are not democracies. But clearly, the stakes could not be higher. And we have to find points of agreement with regimes that we don't share very much in common with at all. But there is an opportunity to do that. It means engaging in dialogue and finding points of agreement. President Biden has opened the door to this. And although there's points of disagreement between the Canadian government and the American government on certain key issues remaining, sure, we have to work with the Americans and then embrace the rest of the international community so that we can move this agenda forward.
Thank you.
Hi, this question is directed towards Peter. Our current first past the post electoral system is outdated and does not provide equal weight to each vote, causing voters to rely on strategic voting. How do you plan to ensure fair and proportional representation during upcoming elections?
Thank you for that. There's no question that electoral reform is something that people in this community care about. They care about it in the country as well. But I would also say that if we put all our energy into the question of electoral reform, we would be missing the point. Electoral reform is not a panacea to our problems, right? It's not going to solve poverty. It's not on its own. It's not going to solve where we are in terms of the pandemic. It's not going to create greater equality. First past the post has many flaws, there's no question, but under first past the post, we have achieved a charter of rights, a public healthcare system, which by the way, under the Conservatives would possibly be dismantled. We've heard they're championing a private system. And I would just say also that it does allow people the right to express themselves in a vote. And I'll leave it there.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Are there any further audience questions? All right, we will now move into our closing remarks. We will go in the same order as the introductions, starting with Durka, followed by Marianne, and then Peter. You have 1.5 minutes.
Thank you, everyone. It is time for a government that delivers real results for people like you. As I listen to people in London North Centre, I hear worry and stress in their voices. Even before COVID-19, life was getting harder for everyday people. It's been harder to keep up, harder to find a home, and more difficult even to sometimes to get an education, and harder to find hope for the future. Going back to that isn't good enough. It's time to do better. Over the last 6 years, Trudeau could have taken real action against stagnating wages, skyrocketing housing costs, unaffordable childcare, student debt, and ballooning prescription drug prices. But the Liberals chose not to. When push comes to shove, they gave big corporations and their wealthy friends a free ride. If we want different results, we need to make different choices to get those better results. And what we need now is the courage to act together. And that's exactly what New Democrats offer. The people of London North Centre deserve someone who will fight for us, and I'm ready to do that. On September the 20th, please cast your vote for the NDP. Thank you.
Marianne.
Thank you to all the organizers and for everyone who took the time to come out tonight and for the excellent questions. We have discussed many important issues tonight, but as many have agreed, the climate crisis is the issue of our time. We have known for decades that we are disrupting the Earth's climate, but the problem seems so hard to solve. No one wants to go back in time and give up the progress we have made. But this is the greatest misunderstanding. Instead of giving things up, the Green Party envisions a leap forward, a leap to the future. But let me ask you, if you were a passenger on a boat and the boat has a leak, the crew has said that we have plenty of time to deal with the issue, and then the biologists report back that the water level is rising. And the crew says, well, we have other priorities to deal with at the moment. And then the scientists report that the water level is getting dangerous. And the crew says, we are working on it, but we can't react too quickly. Wouldn't you like to see someone on board that has been advocating for corrective action all along, not someone who has come late to the party and isn't really sure what they believe, if they believe in the problem? Or someone who has been working on the problem for several years now and has a plan where they will drill the hole larger before they can fit the plug in? It only takes 1 or 2 elected Greens to hold the government to action. We know what we need to do. We just need the political will to get it done. This election, vote Green and send a message that you want real action on the climate emergency. COVID has shown us that we can work together for a green, clean, brand new future. Thank you.
Peter?
Thank you again for the opportunity to be here tonight. There's a lot in the closing statement of Ms. Prout that I disagree with. I won't take that up now. What I do agree with is when she said that we have to have the courage to act together. We can act together by voting. So my message is to the community that's watching at home. My message is to the students here that are so passionate about politics. Something is happening to our politics, and it's not something that we can be very happy with. There is a turn towards extremism. That is undeniable. And we are not immune from some of the things that transpired in the United States over the past few years. There is left-wing populism, there is right-wing populism. And we have to approach things in a moderate way, in a pragmatic way, and a progressive way, through a platform that's costed, with a government that has a real record of results on the national level, and with a member of parliament. And I'm going to be modest here, it's not just me. I've had a great office staff. I've worked with a lot of elected officials locally to get results for this community, whether on transit, whether on supporting our post-secondary institutions, on helping health workers through the pandemic, on helping businesses and individuals and families get through the most challenging moment of our times. The central question of this campaign is, how do we get past the pandemic? You've heard me speak here tonight about the importance of that. Once we do, we can deal, and as we do, I should say, as we do, we can deal with the challenges of our time. Climate change, Indigenous issues, and making sure that people have a fair shot. That's what the Liberal Party has always stood for. That's what I stand for. And I humbly ask for your support on September 20th. Thank you very much.
That is all from our candidates today. I would like to invite the Academic Dean, Gillian Belfort, to give closing statements.
Great. Thank you for having me. I have to say, I just moved to London a short while ago. And it was really great for me to be here tonight to learn a lot about the community and a lot about the issues that these candidates are taking so seriously and to heart. So I learned a great deal. So thank you very much this evening for that opportunity. But I would say that tonight represents probably one of the best things about King's, and a total shout out to the faculty of the political science program at King's. It is exceptional, and just the hope for leadership and the inspiration and the energy that was here tonight. I just want to acknowledge the students in terms of their challenging questions, their energy, their willingness to think deeply about big problems, and to begin to become strategic thinkers, and to begin to mobilize and really begin to affect change. So congratulations on an exceptional evening. After a long day of sad things, it was great to sit here this evening with you. So thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Jillian. I just want to give a round of applause one last time to our lovely candidates tonight. Thank you so much for coming. I would like to give another thank you just briefly, again, obviously to the candidates, to all of our volunteers who have helped out with this event, to the students, whether you're here in the Kenny Theater or virtually, thank you for your interest and very important interest in voting. We wouldn't be here without you. And lastly, just another quick shout out to Corey from IT. He really helped us make this event possible. So just as we're wrapping up, we're just going to have some refreshments and snacks just outside in the SLC. You're more than welcome to join us. Just remember, social distancing rules will still be in place and mask use when you're not eating and drinking. Thank you so much, everyone, again for coming, and have a lovely night.